Hey, Rogue Nation. My wife and I celebrated our 20-year wedding anniversary this year. And I've now learned that I'm in a season of life where only the people who are working for me or my nieces and nephews are all in that stage of getting married. One of the things that you learn pretty fast when you're getting married or when you've kind of celebrated that is that the symbol of that love is sitting on that woman's hand. And she's got a big ring on her hand, and the diamond matters. The value of that diamond matters. And there are 4 C's that everybody learns about when it comes to diamond quality: cut, clarity, color, and carat size. So the one thing that's really interesting about all of that, though, these 4 C's, is that it actually takes a magnifying glass to see most of those things. It's actually difficult, pretty hard to see. Today, we're going to be talking about 4 C's as well, but not those 4 C's. These 4 C's are the 4 C's of startup success. And before you start thinking, well, hey, today's episode may not be for me, I've met a lot of businesses that tell me that they are a 10-year, 15-year startup. And the things that we're talking about today are those things that bring startups success, but they're also those things that bring companies that consider themselves startups that success. So I want you to stay tuned with us. And the other really important thing about all of this is that while it's so difficult to see those C's when it comes to a diamond, today's C's are going to be really, really easy to see. It's great to have you with it. It's great to have you here for another episode of While You Were Working. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are very lucky to welcome Brian Zweig. Brian is a sales consultant, and he actually actively works early stage technology companies, helps them expand their sales revenue opportunities in their organizations as a sales consultant. But before we get into all of that, and you've got some really cool, interesting strategies that you want to share with us, Brian, I actually want to introduce the audience to a little bit of you and kind of tell us some fun, interesting facts about you. I understand that in the last 7 years, you have resided in 4 different states. I understand that you've lost quite a few of those teeth that you've got in your mouth right there. Some cool, interesting stories there. And I understand that not too long ago, you actually were playing a pickup basketball game and you found yourself guarding against some NBA vets. Tell us a little bit about those things.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. I'll go in chronological order because the teeth falling out happened before I even started working. I don't even think probably junior high had happened at that point. But I guess it foreshadows my career a bit. I've had 19 teeth pulled. The adult teeth decided starting in first grade that they were ready to come in and the baby teeth were not ready to leave. And so I had to have routine procedures where, one time I go and they say, hey, we got to take out 2. One time I go and they say, hey, we're going to take out 7. And I never had a set number. So yeah, that was a lot. But I can take a lot of shots to the jaw and there's no problem. And then as far as moving around, I in 2011 joined Ampush and started out in Chicago in my apartment and then bounced around a few states. I moved down to Florida with my fiance, going to be wife, because she had finished her grad school program. I was flying all around the country. It felt like I was a consultant at that point in time. And I just asked the CEO, who's a childhood friend, do you mind if I move to Florida? So she has a support system. And he was cool. And, we went from a 5-person shop and then scaled to, when I left, about 150 people. So that ultimately brought me out to San Francisco. So I went from Illinois to Florida to California, and then now I'm in Texas. So that's the last state, and I'm done hopefully for a while. And then as far as the basketball, you can see behind me, I've got a couple basketballs. I'm pretty passionate about sports. We have at my previous company, Social Native, a co-founder. His name's Eitan Albaz. He and his brother Gil built what's present Google AdSense, and they have like a legendary weekly run where it's mostly like venture capitalists, CEOs of companies that might have invested in as venture capitalists, just the who's who of LA folks. And I was really excited to go play there because I was in decent shape and I also played competitively most of my life, and so I felt I'd stand out in a way that was different from obviously their strengths. And this gentleman named Earl Watkins, who's also from the state of Missouri, but he's on the other side, Kansas City, 13-year NBA vet, was a coach for a year or 2. He rolled in because I guess he's an angel investor in one of the companies where a gentleman was in from, and they stuck me on him. Long story short, we played best of 7. My team won. I think he took it easy on me, but it was a fun experience. So there's a background on me.
That's awesome. Well, and you already even like told us a little bit about how you were working to stand out. And I know that's one of your hallmarks is that you definitely try to stand out. Hey, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about that standout and some of those things. You talked about all those teeth. I mean, what a cool story. I mean, not cool when you're sitting in the chair, but cool story. And just really interesting thing there. And it really does kind of foreshadow a lot of what you do. A lot of grit, a lot of hard work, a lot of those things kind of bootstrapping and pulling things up. When we've had conversations in the past, you were actually talking about some very specific areas when it comes to startup success. And we kind of called them the 4 C's. You talked about curiosity. So for those of you taking notes, curiosity, consistent processes, constraints, and then consumer-focused content. I want to take the first one there and we want to talk about curiosity. What is it about curiosity that in your mind actually breeds success? Why is curiosity so important to success?
Yeah, you don't evolve, you don't succeed. And I'll give you an example. When it came to Ampush, we were right-hand rail ads on Facebook circa 2010, 2011, and there wasn't much you could optimize, right? But Facebook started improving and they moved over to the news feed, and so we had to adapt as well. And early on, we were just selling likes, and there was no instantaneous business result. And lo and behold, Facebook says, well, now you've built millions and millions of likes, you got to go pay for page post ads because organically you're not going to be showing up as much as you thought you were. And so we had to adapt there. And we were curious, like we were always having to learn new strategies to make sure that we could go out and offer the best option for our clients. And then lastly, after doing the page post ads, we just were over it because it was super volatile. And we decided to only work with performance marketers because, if you gave $1.25 back, if they put $1 in, business kept coming your way no matter what. And so we wanted to maintain and decide our own destiny.
Okay, that's cool. And so you've just built a career out of being curious, right? I mean, isn't that what you curious?
Yeah. Yes, correct. If there are 2 things I need to be doing in business to feel happy: making my clients successful, because that's where you earn your money from. That's where you get your good name from. You got to put your clients first always. And the second thing is ongoing education. I feel very stale and upset if I'm not constantly putting new processes in, learning about new industry, etc. And one of the reasons I actually went the consulting route is I wanted to help as many early stage companies at once across various verticals. So yeah, you always got to be learning.
I think that's really important. The curiosity on our side, we don't always use those words, but we use the word experiments. And what we're trying to do is figure out what can we be doing to take someone to that next level and do the evolution. And that's exactly what you were just talking about. Even with those rails and the different taking it to that next level, there's an opportunity for you to be doing experiments so that you can be keeping pace, learning something new, et cetera. So I think curiosity is something that no matter what stage business you are, it's what you need for the environment for 2018 through 2019, this time frame. One of the things you also just mentioned, this idea of constraints. You were kind of talking a little, or consistent processes. You were talking about how you have to build those processes in order to bring yourself success. And I know we spend a lot of time over here trying to uncomplicate the process. And we've had a lot of guests on who said, you know what, the number one thing that we're seeing that marketers do is that they're just overcomplicating things. So you talk a lot about building processes, making them simple enough that anybody could follow them. Why are these consistent processes such a valuable weapon? And then can you give us any examples of where you've been able to do that with some of the startups companies you've worked with?
Yeah, I've got two examples that I'll pass on. Without process, you can't scale anything. And then what you were saying earlier is you can make it so simple that somebody else can learn it. If it's teachable, then somebody can replicate it, and then it scales. So you've got to make it simple enough that anybody off the street. And my first example is when I joined Ampush, I was flying all over the country, and that wasn't the best move. I rejiggered my process and decided only to focus in on Chicago and New York because I was the only business person, and I determined that I could cover the most square footage or whatever ground by doing so. And so that was my first process. Forget about Texas, forget about California, forget about the rest of it. Like, you have to just focus and succeed in 2 areas. And that succeeded. the next process I found along the way is when I was in New York and it was 3 days at a time and I had 20 meetings on the books and I was running around Manhattan, I wasn't building pipeline of new meetings that I needed for, obviously the months ahead. And so I had a rhythm down on how I would achieve my meetings. I won't get into too much detail, but at the end of the day, I put it all in Excel step by step. And then the actual and the contacts you'd reach out and the syntax of their emails and all that stuff. And then I put down various emails that I would prep. And then I brought my wife in. So she was pregnant with our first child and she was getting ready. And I just said, can you do this for me when I'm on the road?
Help me out.
She was game. She obviously loves to help me out in all my crazy, wild ideas. And we did that. And she crushed it. And I reached out to my CEO. I was like, can you believe how many meetings she's getting? And she's just doing this process. And the next thing you know, he's like, 4 interns were in the office from Cal Berkeley because we were headquartered out in San Francisco. They all picked it up and did the same thing, and it repeated itself. And then, you bring in your full-time BDRs and things like that. But we were a bootstrap business. We had to lean on the significant other to start. Now,
why do you think people choose not to go to the work of figuring out what that process is, building it, figuring out how to replicate it? Why does it feel like, just as long as they're active and they're doing a whole bunch of stuff that they feel like they're being successful? Why is it so important to figure out what that framework is and to replicate it and build it?
I don't know why other people don't do it automatically. I think I think my time in business has taught me to always start with the end in mind. So my goal is to have 100 meetings with Fortune 500 companies by December 31st, 2018. And then from there, I can visualize, well, what will that process be for my success? So I think a lot of people, they don't have the drive and the motivation to establish the goals before they get going. And so they're just going through daily routines, not thinking about what they're building towards. So I would say if you wanted to switch that up and make yourself more productive, just start with figuring out who you want to be and what you want to achieve and write it down and commit to it. I actually build a list at the beginning of the year and I have all my goals, personal, professional, etc., and I sign it. And I actually have it hanging in my office right there. But that would be the first thing I would tell anybody to do before even considering process, like build your goals. So that's first.
That's a really cool idea. Nice idea for 2019. You can kind of get started with that. That's really cool. I know you had a second example. Did you want to go ahead and share that, or? Yeah,
this one would be helpful for a lot of folks that are starting businesses. But there's a acronym BPO, which stands for Business Process Outsourcing. And I've worked with people, great people, college-educated people in India and Pakistan and the Philippines, who the wage difference helps me bring them on board so that they can schedule meetings on my behalf so that I can focus elsewhere. They can do reports in Excel. You can hire people that are straight quants. They can help build PowerPoint presentations. You can literally write on a napkin what you want on each side of your presentation, go to bed at 12 a.m., wake up at 7 a.m., and your presentation's done. And so business process outsourcing is something that I would look at your overall tasks and find what's drain you and then what also might not leverage your strategic thinking. And it's more just you could do it and you can be better, but it's not going to drive the most value for your learning and for your clients, and find a company overseas. And if some people ping me later, I can tell them a couple of the companies I still work with.
Okay, that's cool. We'll make a note of that and put that in the show notes. So we've talked about the first 2 C's. The third C is around constraints. I know that a lot of people, certainly people we meet with, they talk about the constraints and how that almost handcuffs them and says we can't do things because we've got these constraints. We look at those constraints, and I know you look at those constraints as an opportunity for some creativity, figuring out how you can move forward inside of those constraints. Yeah. And your fourth one has to do with customer-centric content. And I kind of wanted to put those two together because you used customer-centric content as an opportunity to work around some constraints. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen and what we should actually be valuing when it comes to this customer-centric content idea.
Yeah, I'll give a little backstory. So, because this transitioned me from Ampush to social native, we had, let's say, 100 clients at Ampush in the last year I was there, and they were really awesome clients, mostly performance marketers, so Dollar Shave Club, Uber, Farmers Insurance, Hulu, etc. And it was all about bringing back that return, whether it was a new subscriber or an acquisition or a new rider, etc. We were very capable of driving the right bids, the right budgets, and all that good quantitative stuff. But on the right side of the brain, on the creative end, there was not a customer of ours that could build a supply chain of content vast enough to maintain the efficacy of their ad dollars. And so not like 99%, 100% of our customers had this issue. And so they were ineffective in getting the message out to the person that needed to absorb it to take that call to action that they desired or whatever goal that they established for us to achieve. And so Social Native is very, very cool because it has a marketplace of content creators, and you can automate the entire process. You can do large volumes, you can do small volumes. It's short form video, long form video, still content, and everything in between. But when I came across the technology and the founding team there, I was really impressed because I thought this really could help the constraints in which I saw were unachievable with a lot of the Ampush clients. And in today's ecosystem where people, and now we're talking ad tech, so a specific background for me, when people are communicating with their customers at scale, it's not a one-size-fits-all model anymore. And so you need to have something that's more relevant to Chip or more relevant to Brian, because Chip might be a 32-year-old guy that loves mountain biking and skiing and all that stuff, and I'm a 35-year-old guy that likes just watching a ton of movies. So at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you have an arsenal vast enough to maintain the conversation and relationship in an ongoing way.
Absolutely. Well, and what you've got there is you've got your customer centricity right there. You got your constraints. You've got everything we just talked about, curiosity, and just making sure that you're appealing to what someone actually cares about and what they're curious about. And then, of course, you've built a consistent process. So I love how that one story can kind of tie all those 4 C's together. As I was thinking about this show that we put together, every week is around people are so busy. We are so busy just doing stuff. We don't take a second to figure out how do we replicate and scale those processes. We don't take a second to go, what should I be curious about? What's going on around me? And from that perspective, and we actually spend much too much time looking at those constraints and not seeing them as an opportunity to be creative, but actually, just handcuffing ourselves and saying we can't do something. Our premise, the premise for this whole show is that because we're so busy, we forget to look up and we miss things while we're working. And so I ask every guest the same question, and I'm interested to know your perspective, Brian, on what should people be paying attention to that they're not paying attention to because they're just so busy just doing their day job.
It's a good question. It's a tough question because as you ask it, I'm thinking about a lot of different audiences, and I'm going to try to tie this to rogue marketing because obviously your audience is your audience. I mean, I can come from a similar space, but at the end of the day, we're all servicing clients, right? You and James are servicing clients. We need to make sure that we're driving value. When I talk to my clients, I need to make sure I'm driving value. I think people today are super short-sighted with their goals, and their goals might not even be the purest. I'll just say it. You're publicly traded companies. It's about making stockholders happy. It's not necessarily about making the customers happy. You do certain things that'll break that relationship. I think people need to just be more long-term greedy and set long-term goals so that they can start a new routine in their day-to-day execution where they build for something that is stable and is there when they're done in their career. I think at the end of the day, like, money comes and goes. We all ride waves in our careers, but if you build something and you have big goals for the long term and you keep the customer in mind as opposed to the stockholder is still important, but I think you focus on your customer first. I think at the end of the day, it all will meld together. And I give that answer simply because there are so many different types of people that could watch a video like this that applies to everybody about making sure you know who that person is and taking care of that customer.
I think I'm going to steal that term in some of our future conversations. I love that term, long-term greedy. We need to be long-term greedy, and I think that's a really good way. I think it's both sides. You got to do the short term. You got to produce those results and do some of that stuff. But we don't spend enough time being long-term greedy. I love that. Well, Brian, it's amazing how fast time actually can go, and I appreciate you spending time with us and taking the time to share some of your wisdom there. If we've got any startups that are watching right now or that will be paying attention, over the course, these things have great shelf life. So this is an opportunity for you to connect with Brian, and I hope you'll do that. Just follow the links in the show notes, and you will know exactly how to get a hold of Brian. We'll share all his contact information, how you can connect with him, etc. And until next time, Rogue Nation, have a great week. Talk to you then.
Thanks, Chip. Have a great day.
You too.